Good afternoon, Father Peter.
Good to be with you.
So, getting right into it, freedom. Let's, as a society, right now especially, I think we're very focused, many of us, on freedom, but probably not the right freedom.
Yeah. I think that, what's come out of this, we said, or I've said, and I'm not the only one, others have said, this is kind of a time of sifting, sorting ourselves out, God calling us to something. And so we see it played out on the social backdrop, or whatever people are saying. I want my freedom.
The commentation, how people communicate, you see it on social media, Facebook.
Yeah, but I was saying even like protests, people saying, I want my freedom, I want my freedom,
like in Michigan.
Exactly, would be probably the most obvious example. And although I might be interested in that on one level, there's something deeper. If the Lord is sort of sifting us and calling us to examine ourselves and who we are and what we're all about, then He's speaking to us about a different kind of freedom. And if the Lord frees you, then you'll truly be free, kind of thing. And so I always want to go to that, sort of lean into that. What's that freedom that the Lord has for us? So if the world is saying that, which is often what happens, the world, what you see in the world is just a reflection of what we should really be focusing on. So if the world is saying, we want our freedom, and others in the world are saying, we want safety, and you see that dichotomy, and sort of the sides are being drawn up, and people are getting more and more outspoken, vociferous, and we hope not violent, but in that sense.
Yeah.
We take a step back and we say, okay, well, what is true freedom? Because I want freedom too. I think every human being who comes into the world wants freedom. What are the things that constrain me? And so then we have to look at our lives and say, well, the things that constrain me, first and foremost, if I hear Jesus, first and foremost, those things that constrain you are going to be sin. And that personal sin, we've talked about that, and it's interesting, in our whole thing, we started with how do you speak to people about this situation in COVID-19, and then we go from that to purity of heart, and then we go to hope, and now here we're talking about freedom because, sort of this awakening in ourselves. We also recognize that what God wants to awaken us is this profound desire for freedom. But first and foremost, that freedom from sin. And so, once again, we go back to purity of heart, that says that's actually how to be very, very free in whatever circumstances. You and I, we know those stories. I grew up, hearing the stories of sort of the Roman persecution or persecution down through the ages. And then I remember in my teen years, Father Walter Cizik's, his story about how he went back into Russia and to preach the gospel, and how he spent most of his time in a gulag, and things like that. And then more recently, I cannot remember his name, but the bishop from Vietnam, and that story I've heard stories about. Yeah. And just sort of he was in
prison for 5 years and continued to say Mass daily and forwarding the homilies each day to the people of the village.
I think like writing on little scraps of paper and things, but just that sense of how I just remember one story where he is in prayer and he's being kept in a prison that's just a short distance from his cathedral, where he was. I mean, he had been in one place and then they moved him so that he would be that close, and that it would be a great source of anxiety for him that he was that close to his place, where he could work and preach and do all of those things, and he knew there was such good in that. And so he complains to Jesus and he says, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, I need to be, in order to be effective as a bishop, I need to be doing that. And, I need to be free. I need to be active.
I need to be able to active in a ministry to preach to my flock.
Exactly.
And that's a beautiful story, and how the young girl from the village where he is from came in and realized that the bishop was so sad and said, Father, what's wrong?
Yeah.
And he explained his issue. So she went back to the village and told her father and the elders. So what they did is every day when she would come, there would be a candle on the tray. So they hollowed out the candle, and each morning they would roll a piece of rice paper, stick it in the candle with a small pencil. And she explained this to him when she got there, because he wasn't allowed to have a pen and paper. And he would then write down his homily each day.
I didn't know all of those details. You've read it and I haven't, but I've just been told some stories. But the story that I was told was, he complains to Jesus, and Jesus says, I could have anybody do that, but this is what I want you to do. To be in jail and to be one with the Lord, and to understand the depth of what that was all about, and how he was suffering, and how that suffering was much more effective in God's eyes than what he would do in active ministry. That's a puzzlement to a lot of us in active ministry.
Yeah, but I think from the outside, if most of us assessed, was he free? You'd say, well, no, he's in prison. He's not only is in prison, but he can. The pain there must have been like his mouth must have been watering to be in his cathedral.
Yeah.
And yet he was so free with the Lord.
That was this morning's homily. It struck me at that point, and so I said it. But there I was, we were praying to Joseph the worker, and I've always associated Joseph the worker with people going off to work or whatever. And what I do is, I don't always consider it work. I mean, some of them call it work, but it's my vocation, my calling, and so. But this morning I was like, praying for those people who cannot work. I'm like, that's me, in a lot of ways. I mean, I can. Thanks be to God, and through your help and Ellie's help and others, I'm able to do certain things. But it was like longing, just that pain. Let me just offer that to the Lord. Give that to the Lord for his people. He can use that, And so then we begin to understand maybe what freedom is. Like if God offers you freedom, then it's from oppression of being bound by sinful habits. Or it's by always having to, certain personality traits where we always have to be right, or we always have to get the last word, or we have to, tell somebody, correct somebody, or do whatever, and all that. And there's a certain point I think God calls us to on a personal level that says, stop. If you're willing to suffer for people, for love, that's powerful and effective. And that's how you're going to find freedom.
For us to hear that, though, the journey has to start with how are we spending our time? How do we open our hearts to the Lord?
Right.
You and I were talking earlier about just what do you read? What do you watch on television? When you and I both have similar interests on YouTube with faith-based channels, and that keeps us in this place that is in line with the Lord. But when sinful behavior fills us, we shouldn't be surprised that we can't take this approach to freedom with the Lord.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you have that thing, so if I think any human being would understand this, because we've all been bound by something or other, something, either other people's stuff or circumstances of our life, or or maybe something that we got into. And so there's that place where if we separated from that, and the Lord separates us from that, and he brings us healing or whatever, we experience this point of freedom, and we say, oh my goodness, that's wonderful. And then how do you share that with somebody else? Somebody coming along, one of the examples we use, like the 12-step program.
Yeah.
You were saying to me, if somebody came to you and said, I find my freedom in a glass of scotch or something, whatever, I can finally relax, or I can finally whatever. Within moderation, that's fine, but if you have a disposition to then have the next and the next and the next, or always looking forward to that, like that's your great comfort in life.
As if that's where the answer is, right?
And other people can do it with ice cream.
Right. Which would be me.
chocolate, or whatever
Really
it
good
might
chocolate.
be, kind of thing. But there's a certain point, like, well, how are you going to find freedom? How are you going to find freedom for that? So can you separate? Well, I don't have to separate myself from chocolate like an alcoholic does from alcohol, but I do have to separate myself from that tendency to always go there. If there's a stressor in my life, or there's a, there's a point where I'm trying to deal with something, or how do I deal with it? If I always go to that, I know very well, like it happens to me all the time now with the stressors of trying to do whatever, and I say, there's the chocolate, or there's the whatever it is, or there's the chapel. And it doesn't mean that I'm never going to have chocolate, or I'm never going to have chips, or something or whatever, but it means if I'm looking for relief, if I'm looking for real freedom, or freedom and relief from that stress, I have to go to the Lord. And he keeps calling me in the midst of that. And there's a profound wisdom that I'm learning, every day in my life. It doesn't mean, sometimes it means I can eat that piece of chocolate and go into the chapel, whatever. But it's because, I don't want to become so constricted by my own mentality,
Sure.
My own obsessions or whatever. Oh, I have to do this, and like, no. Relax, but find time to be with the Lord, and that's where he's gonna like free you from these kinds of things. He's gonna help you. He's gonna show you a path by which you can really relax. If that's what you need, can you rest? I'll help you rest. I'll help you relax. I'll help you. But aside from the Lord, you're never gonna find that.
Yeah, it's not in more information. We've had conversations recently about people thinking that the answer to all of this COVID-19 business is, well, the more research that we have, and it would be great if that was the answer.
Right.
But the answer is in the Lord.
Right, exactly. And that's what I was saying in one of the homilies. I was saying, you can have all this information, but if you don't have the truth of God, then you're never going to have the truth of that information even. You're never going to know how to go forward. If I'm living a particular life that's bound by whatever, and then I think, oh, well, I really want freedom, from the restrictions of government control, or from this or that, I'm never actually going to experience that freedom, or that relief, or that whatever. If you're accept the Lord and you're following the Lord in his path, then you'll truly be free. That's the hope. So in all of these times, if people find themselves getting anxious, worried, afraid, more information about the disease may help to a certain point, but only to a certain point. You're going to have so many conflicting viewpoints about what I should do and what I shouldn't do and all of that kind of thing. It's only going to help to a certain point. If you turn your heart to the Lord and you say, Lord, I will do whatever you want, even if that means, like these beautiful examples, I end up in a gulag or in a prison somewhere, but you will know freedom. You'll know the satisfaction of what your heart really desires. You will achieve that. You will attain that because the Lord brought you to that. And I think, what the Lord does for us as well is, like, if we're following him, he will put things in our path, and he'll say, well, that's the information I want you to collect. That's the thing you need to hear. Or we'll hear it somewhere.
One of the readings from Mass this morning, the conversion of Saul, Acts of the Apostles, chapter 9, you could look from the outside and say that prior to his conversion, Saul was free, right? He could travel the countryside. The high priest had given him a letter allowing him to round up followers of Christ and turn them over to the Romans. But it wasn't until his conversion and when Christ came to him. Now, over time, we know he was imprisoned how many times and tortured, but there was his freedom.
Innumerable. Yeah, and he appears to be powerful. Saul appears to be powerful,
Oh,
and
intimidating.
he's got the world by the tail. I mean, he's a student. He's very bright and very clever, and is going to work his way up in the ranks with the other rabbis and all that kind of thing. And now he has power, and he's given this, and God says to him, "No," and follow his journey from there. Exactly how many times he was he enumerates it, and I've been stoned and imprisoned and beaten,
Right.
so many times, and I've been, killed, all these different, and yet he's perfectly at peace and free, and it's the astounding thing, kind of thing. And so we come in, and what I want people to sort of know in the midst of all of this is, like, I know what it feels like, and you want to just break out of self-isolation and all that, and there'll be a time for that. But do not put your hopes in a date that a government official will say that you're free to move about the country, to steal somebody's ad, or you can do whatever you want. Remember the days when we thought we could do whatever we want, when we thought freedom was just license to do whatever we ever, break all the commandments and do all that kind of thing. Nobody was ever free. Everyone is just more and more bound by their own sinfulness. And then what happened was that sinfulness got embedded, not just in personal sin, but in societal sin. So now we have the constrictions of our society that has grown fetid but more and more demanding and dominant. And you will refer to people by these pronouns. You will allow people to do whatever. They tell the church even, you're wrong. You have to allow same-sex marriage. You have to allow all these things. You have to allow for abortions, and on it goes. Like, the sins of society now are at the throat of the church even. Like, no, that's not freedom. That's I think this time sort of brings all of that up and bubbles up, and it says you won't be free. And you won't be free when somebody says on May 15th or 14th or May 29th, or I don't care, you'll be free then and you can do whatever you want. Will you? Will you?
It's a really powerful comparison that you just made. You and I are about the same age, and we kind of grew up through that sexual revolution, and people thought, oh, wow, that's freedom. I get to do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Well, we know that it's the exact opposite.
It's just oppression.
Binding.
Yeah, it's just oppression. And it comes from within, and then it finds a place in society, and the more place it finds in society, the worse it becomes, and we have fewer and fewer places to go. We know that as Christian people, you have fewer and fewer places to go. You can't just let your kids watch primetime TV or whatever. I can't even watch it, kind of thing, and on and on and on. More and more restricted where I can go, where I feel free, where I feel like I'll be nourished, where I can find a decent laugh without indecent humor, so but I have to, it's God calling me, saying, if you want to be free, you'll find it here. And so that's where we have to keep turning to.
So, Father Peter, those that are out there, maybe this is resonating with them right now, right? And they're struggling with this.
Yeah.
And I suggest you X.
So there are people who this resonates with because they have been doing this for more years than it can count. And they're on the right track, and they just follow. If there are others who are saying, this makes sense, so like, I don't want to be bound by my sin, like an alcoholic is bound by alcohol, or a drug addict is bound by the drug. I want to be free from that. Well, my response to you is what it's always been, right? How we start, like, develop a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Pray from your heart, and He will show you what steps you need to take. And then if you want that kind of purity of heart that comes, real freedom comes with purity of heart, St. Joseph and Mary, well, then pray the rosary. If you want to know the wisdom of God, where can I turn and where I can't, read the scriptures, especially the Gospels. You know, these things that we just go back to, but most especially allow God to speak to your heart in that personal relationship with it. Let Him, you know, start to give you that freedom. You're not always going to make the right choice or know where to go, but you'll find, you know, there'll be people. Hopefully, there'll be wise people in the Christian community, and you'll know who they are. It's like they're living this life, like uncompromisingly. They're living the Christian life. They've adopted a culture, you know, that comes with Christianity. They've adopted that kind of culture that brings freedom, but peace and joy and beauty. And when you find those people, you know, bring them into your life or go into their lives if they bring you in.
Yeah, if someone has made it this far through this video, they probably are either on this path, so this is an affirmation for them, or they know that the path that they've been on, boy, this isn't working. This is not.
So now's the opportunity. You know, when everybody's asked to pause and stop doing a lot of what you're doing. So just simply, you know, think about how I could rework my daily routines. Now would be a wonderful time. You know, like you have freedom, in a sense, to start from nothing. And how do you rework your daily routine? What time you get up? What do you eat? How do you pray? What do you read? What's your entertainment? How do you exercise? Where do you look for beauty? What's going to feed your soul? On and on and on. These things that we would know. And then we would know to sort of keep away from other things. We would know, like, that's.
I remember my first retreat that I went on, I don't know, it's probably 15 years ago now. And I was at a point in my career where it was really noisy. I had a lot going on. I was traveling a lot. And I remember distinctly the retreat house we went to was in Weston, Massachusetts. And so we went to a priory, and you get checked in and you bring your stuff up to your very simple room. Of course, my mind is going at 800 miles an hour, and all of a sudden you come to a screeching halt. And the room is very simple, just a bed, crucifix, a desk, and a sink. That was it. And here you are, you're like this, and you think that, I thought prior to that, I needed all the stimulus, and I didn't. What I needed was the absence of that stimulus. And there was an adoration chapel down the hall, and all of a sudden I do exactly what you're talking about, recognizing that freedom, joy, is with the Lord. It's not in all that noise coming out of New York City and this and that. Right? It's not. And how glorious that was when I recognized that. Let the Holy Spirit turn off one valve, and then the lights came on.
Right. And it sort of would be like, in your instance, if God says, I have people to work all those jobs that you think only you can do. I have it, but I need your heart in prayer. Or the example to me is, you know, that Archbishop in Vietnam, like, I have people to do all of these kinds of things, or I can accomplish, God said to him, like, I can accomplish my will however I want to. But what I need from you is the willingness to suffer, to be a prisoner. Okay. That's what you need from me? I'm willing, more than willing, because everything I need is from Jesus, you know, comes from Him. So if I get everything I need, I am perfectly at peace and perfectly free. And if He's getting what He needs, I'm satisfied.
Hallelujah. Great to spend time with you.
You too.
Here we are in May, and let us all remember, trust in the Lord.